Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the True Safety Podcast. I'm really excited this morning to have Dave Ferro with me. And Dave Ferro is the owner. He has a safety company and of Dave Ferro Safety. And today we are just going to nerd out on safety. I was joking with Dave before we hit record of we don't get to nerd out with a lot of other people about our expertise in safety, but nonetheless, I'm super excited. Dave, welcome. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing fantastic this morning, and I really appreciate being invited on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to this as well.
Awesome. Well, yes. Well, I just want to get right into it. You have a lot of credentials and a lengthy, over 20 years of experience in the health and safety world. That includes construction safety and primarily for oil and gas projects, right? And so can you just tell me how you got into the safety world? Is this something that when you were a kid, you were like, I want to get into safety, or how did this happen?
Okay, well, happy to share the story. I'm not sure that it's an epic quest kind of a story or anything, but a lot of the folks that got into safety back in the day when I did really got in there inadvertently or by accident because safety wasn't really well known. So, in fact, I didn't even know it was a job until I'd already been offered it. So,
I was the same way. Yeah. I'm like, what did I just sign up for?
So sure, my story was I was actually pursuing an ambulance career. I had my EMR, or emergency medical responder, and had some part-time work. And I was working part-time as an armed guard for an armored car company at the time. And my wife was pregnant with our first, so of course I went back and got a job at a restaurant as well, serving food there. It was Tony Roma's, so I'd have to figure out in the morning which of the three uniforms I'd have to pack, usually two. And finally I said to Rachel, I'm going to go back into construction. That's my dad's trade, and I apprenticed under him. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but I thought I could at least make a living at it. So I went into when I was applying, the lady behind the desk said, well, looks like you have your EMR and some construction. Do you want to do safety, and do you want to do first aid on the high-level bridge project? And of course, I said, absolutely, because I needed work. And kind of the fun part is she said, would you accept $15 an hour? And I said, well, yes, I'll certainly accept $15, because at that time, ambulance was paying $7.50. So it was I just hit the jackpot. Yeah, I could do this. So when I got out there, I kind of got lucky because the corporate safety guy, his name is Carl, we're still really good friends, found out that I was out there and came and told me, Dave, if you're going to stay in this, you should go to the Alberta Construction Safety Association, take the Construction Safety Officer group of courses. And he also advised me to go to the University of Alberta and take the OH&S certificate program there. So, he kind of gave me a little guidance and a little break. We all like to pretend we're kind of self-made men, if you will, but in truth, there's always somebody that's helped you along the way. And that was Carl in my case.
I can't agree with you more. Okay, so he gave you some guidance, gave you some advice, some classes to take, and did you jump on it right away, or did it take you a while to say, all right, I'm going to take this profession serious? How'd that go?
Well, I went for it right away, and I suppose I'd been married for 2 years, so new marriage, new family. The opportunity to have a good, solid career that seemed to pay well was definitely enticing. So I went for the CSO things right away, and then I did the university by night school. And in those days, that money was very dear, but it was a good investment.
Absolutely. And so then fast forwarding, I love talking to people in the EMS world. I think that both industries tie beautifully, because I remember starting in the safety industry, and I remember taking some of my first aid classes or first hazmat classes, and the best instructors that I had were in that field. They were full-time or part-time at a fire department. They were in the EMS world, and their stories were incredible. And their perspective on safety was so real. It was real life to them. why we were in the training classroom, why we needed to take these tools and why we needed to take this advice seriously, because they had stories to back it up. So, I mean, how has your EMS background and experience in that industry, how is that tied into the safety industry for you?
In my case, maybe not as much as some, because when I was doing EMS, I was working for a hospital transfer company. So for the most part, we did a
Okay.
lot of stable patients. But that being said, we
Mm.
had a lot of contracts for nursing homes, and we ended up getting the call for all of the kind of non-critical things. So I got very good at
Yeah.
setting splints on broken bones and hips and femurs and arms, because we'd get a lot of the seniors falling down and the arm looks kind of funny
Yeah.
kind of calls. So, we did have a few of those. So,
I see.
and
I see. Okay. All right.
where I did go from that is I did instruct first aid and medical first responder for St. John Ambulance for years and years and years as well, and did that for heart and stroke. So I found that sometimes translated well into my safety career. The instructor type skills were good, and also just having a knowledge of injuries and the potential was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
One
Mm-hmm.
thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is they really believe that if you're badly injured, the doctors can put you back together and that you're going to be good as new. But the reality is nothing like that. There's almost always a loss of functionality, sometimes big, sometimes small. And if we were able to get that across to workers, I think it changes the way they think just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And when you started in this new career, you got your classes, you started to see, all right, this is what this safety world is going to look like. And what kept you in it? What kept your excitement? I mean, you have over 20 years of experience here. And so at first, it must have been a little bit overwhelming, I could imagine, because this is just so new and you weren't anticipating to take this route. So, I mean, what were some of the challenges in your early career starting out in safety, and what kept you going?
Okay, wow. There's a lot to unpack in that question.
That's a lot to unpack.
So, I'll talk
That's a
about what I
lot.
love about safety. And one thing I love about this industry is I think it's a really generalist industry. So you have to know a little about everything to function well. So, for example, a good safety person knows a little about industrial hygiene. I took 2 courses at the U of A, but you also need to know when to call a specialist like a hygienist in. So we know a little bit about ergonomics. I've got to work in some very diverse industries. In the last 5 years, I've been
Mm.
underground in a nickel mine, so 2 kilometers under the Earth's crust. That was entertaining. Done a big tunneling job in BC.
Wow.
Yeah, worked on some solar and wind farms, doing some auditing, and I get to work with some small guys, some local home builders and things as well. So it's just plain fun. And actually, in a couple of days, I'll be shipping up to Yellowknife in the Arctic to have a go at a little mine site for 6 weeks. So something new again for me. So I really,
Travel, travel, travel.
that's true. Yeah. And I've got to work on a few projects where I've put proposals in for and done training plans for jobs in Sweden and Ecuador. So I haven't left the country for those, but still got a little taste of some of the local flavor and legislation. So just the sheer diversity of this is really, really neat in my mind. Now,
Yeah, yeah.
challenges, man. When I got started, I had some challenges. Being in my 20s, I lacked some of the maturity I have now. I kind of like being 50. I find at my age, my temperament is different. And,
Okay.
things that upset or offend me, I can kind of let them roll off a little bit in a way that I didn't in my 20s. And, any advice I'd give to young people is kind of watch that temper and temperament. Things that seem really big at that age are really not sometimes. And sometimes
Mm. Do
it's
you mean? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just sometimes it's better to let things go than take personal offense. And I've gotten to the point in my career where if someone does or says something that isn't too nice to me, I don't feel the need to be mollified by a written apology or even a verbal apology. I can let it go, move on, and keep working with people. And I think that's really helped me out.
Oh, I like that advice. I guess I can only speak from experience, but I also started in the safety industry in my 20s, and I could relate to that. Some of those challenges was just maybe being, for me, it was maybe more being questioned, I guess, or the questioning what I was up to, and or like why, since I'm safety and I'm recommending these new practices or new procedures or just a different way of thinking. So I think that I was questioned, and sure, the delivery of questioning wasn't always the best delivery, and so it was, it could have been taken offensively for sure. And so what was the response? So you started your safety career where, and what industry was it?
Okay, I'd started my safety career, like I said, on the bridge. Now, after that, I ended up going to do some oil sands work. So for a construction company, so we started by doing an upgrading office building up on the Suncor site, and that was my first introduction to industrial work. And boy, did I find that different, because I apprenticed as a carpenter and, small residential company. So we'd be 20 feet up on the walls, walking on them without being tied off and so on. And as you know, on an industrial site, that is absolutely not the way you do business. So I had to learn the new standards and new ways of doing things. And happily, again, there were a few mentors in my life that were able to kind of get me going in the right direction and understanding just what I was expected of me, really.
Yeah. Well, I could just imagine then the construction industry, the culture, the perception for safety. So what was the feedback? I think we have a lot of listeners that might be starting out in their safety career and they're trying to gain traction at a new industry. So what was your experience like? Did you receive a lot of pushback? Were you received with open arms on all your suggestions? Or, what did that look and feel like for you? You're in your 20s, so how was that?
Some of each. It was a little harder in the early days, right? One of the things, especially if you're doing sort of a commercial job on an industrial project, workers that are working steady on industrial sort of know what's expected of them. But if you do like an office building on an industrial project, you'll end up with, say, a drywall crew or a taping crew that's only ever worked commercial and residential. And when they come out and you tell them that, you have to wear a hard hat and safety glasses while you're doing this, they go, "What are you talking about? I'm inside a building. There's nothing above me. How am I going to hurt my head? This is insanity.
Yes.
I can't see the tape with glasses on. This is craziness." And it takes them a job or two to kind of get used to the standards.
So it wasn't, there was questioning. There wasn't easy breezy, we'll do whatever you say. There was some of that. What would your advice be to somebody that maybe they're new in their safety career and they are experiencing that kind of pushback, maybe because it's a company that hasn't embraced a safety culture yet, or they're just, maybe they're old school type of mind of thinking. So, how did you start to gain traction with that company versus, I can imagine we can only say OSHA says this so many times. We can only say, well, guys, like at the end of the day, like this is federally mandated. Like that's the reason why I'm asking you to do those things. So after that doesn't work, what would you recommend on how to get the buy-in? How did you get the buy-in time after time if somebody's experiencing those challenges?
Sure. And to be quite honest, I still get pushback on sites these days. Some of things just never change. The pushback is different, perhaps, but it happens. So maybe a couple of things. I always find that when you get on the site, get out into the field, get to know the people, and start to build relationships. It might seem odd, but I really find that people like to work with people that they enjoy being around, and having a relationship ahead of time sure makes it easier when you're going to correct something. So if,
oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, something as simple as I need someone to put their safety glasses on, just for a simple example. If it's the first time I've ever met them and the first thing I'm doing is giving them a hard time about that, they're not going to respond well. If it's somebody I've talked to steady and I say, "Hey, Joe, what's with the safety glasses? Put them on, man," and just kind of chuckle because I've known them for 2 weeks, it makes it easier, right? So, yeah, personal relationships go a long way. And
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I love how you said that, is that there needs to be, or it's easier, like some words of advice would be, it's easier to correct somebody after you have a relationship with that person, and after you have shown them that maybe you're out on the job because you actually care, like you start off as, you're building that relationship with that person, and you're showing the crew, the team members out there, the reason who you are and what you're all about. Like, I'm here because I want to make sure everyone goes home safely, versus taking that safety cop mindset and, and there's a time and place to really enforce certain things. But I'm definitely all about the relational approach. So that's fantastic. Was there a time that you just, I'm sure you do have stories, but was there a time that somebody was just not, you're asking them to do something and they just weren't seeing it your way? And how did you overcome that?
I've seen that time and again throughout my career, really. And there's really only two ways to go about it. One is you can try to educate, you can try to coach. But there is a point where if someone is not accepting of reasonable education and coaching, that you simply have to make the decision that maybe they're not suitable. And
Sure.
That's a management decision. But, eventually it is acceptable to remove somebody from a project if they simply are not buying into the program.
Yeah. I think safety professionals need to hear that sometimes. I think that, you could only be so self-reflective on, all right, I've tried to approach this person this many times, I've shown them the regs, I've showed them the reason why. And if it comes down to it, I think that safety professionals do have the obligation to communicate with management and leadership and say, this person's just not getting it, because that person then becomes a hazard to the job itself and the culture and everything else on the job site, which could, So I agree with you there. I wanted to take a step back and ask you, out of everything that you've experienced over 20 years in this industry, is what are you passionate about? What excites you? And what do you love doing the most? You're a subject matter expert when it comes to the regulations, and there's the training piece, and there's the policy creation, and there's XY, there's so much in safety. So under the whole umbrella of safety, what gets you fired up? What gets you passionate?
There's a good question, because I really enjoy it all, actually. I've done,
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, because I did a stint for a while where I was the safety director for a major construction company, so got the office piece, and now I'm sort of back in the field. I think I really enjoy what I'm doing right now as a consultant, where I kind of get to do a large variety of jobs and get to interact with a large variety of people. I really enjoy working for with some of the smaller contractors where I'm dealing right with the owner of the company, because these are often folks that are, by the time they call me, they're very interested in making change or making their company safe. And it's really nice to work with those folks. The other day I was just out at, and it weren't even there for safety, just a friend. I was at his company. They do printing and everything. And while he was giving me a tour of the place, he said, well, Dave, what do you think of the safety here? And I'm thinking, well, I'm glad you kind of asked. On his second floor, he had, a top rail, mid rail set up. It's an older building, but no toe board or anything. And they had a workspace right over top of where people would walk through the doors. So I said, there are a lot of things that I could pick on as a safety person, but the only one that really makes me nervous is all those people working right up there with the people down there. And he says, oh, I have this material and this material. I'll throw this up. I'll do this. And he was right on it, and said he was very happy that and he couldn't believe he didn't see it. But if you're not a hazard assessment person, you often don't see those things. You could work there forever, whereas for someone like you and I, it's pretty glaring as soon as we walk in. So I kind of live for those moments where you make a suggestion and people take it seriously, and you see that there's value there.
Oh my gosh, I can't relate to anything more than that. Is that it is a breath of fresh air to work with companies who have owners or have a leadership team that, of course, no one's perfect, but to have for the most part, owners and leaders that want to make a difference. They want your subject matter expertise. They want the safety advice, and they're willing to put their they're willing to put their business's investment back into safety. And, I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot, at least from the podcast and the safety conversations that I'm a part of, is that we talk a lot about changing a culture. I don't really believe in a safety culture. I always just believe in a company culture. To me, there's not an accounting culture and a welding culture, and the truckers have their culture, and then we have the safety. I just think there's a company culture. And so that being said, I think that we can only work on the culture so much as the safety professional or as the safety team, the safety department. And at the end of the day, you can only do so much. It'll only go as far as leadership will allow it to go. Has that pretty much been your experience working with either the in-house safety for large companies or any size of company, and then also owning your own business? Have you always seen that the culture will only go as far as leaders will allow it, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I just learned something today from you, because I've never heard it put in terms of company culture versus safety culture. We're still very much using the term safety culture, but you're right there. If you look at a company that has, or even a project that has bad safety, typically they have bad QA, they're behind schedule, they're not profitable. It just seems well-run companies have good safety, good quality, they run well. So maybe company culture of excellence sort of extends to all areas. It would be really rare to find an incredible company that just doesn't get safety. So
I
like it.
with you. That's how I believe it. I like how you even just worded that, is that you don't see a company that's shooting for excellence in all areas of the business, but it's like, oh, their safety department sucks. So they're, they have excellence. They follow processes and procedures, or they're trying to reach the next level as a business, but everyone's getting hurt. It doesn't normally work that way. And I think that when people feel safe, as far as not just physically safe, but when people feel comfortable and safe around the people that they work with, they're more likely to be a brother's keeper, and they're more likely to say, hey, like you said, there's that relationship there where it's like, hey, let's not do things that way. Or that's just not allowed here. That's just not a part of who we are and what our culture is about. So they'll stop somebody that's not wearing PPE. It's like, hey, we all wear PPE around here. Like that's just the culture. So when there's a standard of excellence, I just think it runs through all departments. So that's interesting to get your input on that. What about this is an interesting question, since you own a safety company, have you worked with a lot or any customers that are just check the box, like, hey Dave, just just get our safety program up and going, we just need to get barely in compliance? And what is it like to work with a company like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some companies just want legislative compliance. Some want a certificate of recognition. I've been lucky that most of my clients haven't been tick the box kind of people. There has been the odd client where they've asked for a safety manual and I've created it, and we haven't really had any follow-up. And so I suspect in those cases that they probably haven't implemented them quite as well as I would have liked, because it's interesting when you talk about safety programs. The quality of your safety program, I find, doesn't matter as much. You can have a brilliantly written safety program. You can have a very basic program, and you can be equally effective with each one. You really live and die on your implementation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so for small guys, I really, really favor a very simple program. And actually, for the big guys, I also favor a very simple program. I find the simpler the program, the more chance that somebody will dust off the manual and actually do it. If something feels complex or feels onerous, they're just going to throw their hands up before they even start and say, this is garbage, I'm not going to do it. So anytime you can simplify a process, I think you have a win in this industry.
Wow. I think that that's huge. that's a huge takeaway for the audience is if you're an in-house safety person, if you're a safety consultant, if you're a safety professional looking to make a difference or an impact in your company, no matter the size, a word of advice is to simplify. And I can't agree more, because I remember starting as a safety professional for an oil and gas construction company, and I've looking back, I think I was trying to implement too much at the same time, because this company was just getting started with their safety program. Really, this was their first, kind of like your story. This is their first time where there's accountability when it comes to PPE, just the basics. So there was a lot, and I was throwing a lot their way. And like you said, it was so overwhelming that people just threw their hands up because it was just too much. And so I really like your advice of, even if you're working for a large organization, hundreds of employees, multiple divisions, the same principles apply. The more simple, the more effective, especially when it comes to trying to implement a new safety program or something like that. That's awesome. One kind of wrapping this up, I would love to ask, you've seen a lot of companies. You've worked with a lot of companies, large, small, oil and gas, construction, industries in between. Out of the great companies, out of the companies that have strived for excellence, can you describe some of maybe like if there's three common things that these companies all have, or it's maybe a program that they all have, or it's just what do these excellent companies have that you've had the chance to work with? Is it good leadership that just really believes in safety? Is it like a behavioral-based safety program that they all have, or what does that look like to work with an A+ excellent company?
Okay. That is, we could write a book on this one.
That's what I was saying. We'll end with this one might take a while to answer.
Right. So I'm going to start with, companies that I've worked with that are excellent and do very well are also companies that are often very humane. So they tend to have, maybe we'll say, a visionary leader at some point who really values people and has brought that into the fold. So you'll know you're in one of those companies when people care about people and people are treated with dignity. And even when people are corrected, it's done in such a way that they, let's just say it this way, a correction doesn't have to sting to make a correction work, right? If you can be gentle with your people, you win. That's actually surprisingly something I learned from my father. And you wouldn't expect to learn from a guy like him because he was born in 1935 on a homestead, was an old school superintendent. But in the era of people yelling, he was actually, a quiet, gentle kind of a person, even though he was, 6'4", 205 pounds of muscle. So I learned that lesson early on him.
Care Bear, a secret Care Bear. Mm-hmm.
That's it. The other thing I find that makes companies very successful is they have a very good system of measurement and a very good system of accountability. Because I know it's trite, but what gets measured gets done. We've said that in the industry for years. And I would take it a little further to say that companies that really do well have a kind of a personal accountability system. So we'd be looking at things like scorecards for managers. Years ago, with the company I worked for, we introduced a bit of a scorecard system to see if we could kind of up the game of our supervisors all around. And all we did was identify a couple of leading indicators that would maybe just even indicate participation. So we took, are they attending safety meetings? Are they doing their weekly inspections? Are they doing their daily observations? Pretty simple measurements. And then we scored them and used a traffic light system, so they're either green, yellow, or red. Okay. And then what we did is we compiled them every month and we published them throughout the whole company. So it was very visible. And if you know anything about construction superintendents, they're, type A personalities. Nobody wants to be on the bottom of that stack. So when you have a red traffic light in your site, you can guarantee there's a little conversation with your people saying, how come you guys aren't doing inspections? It's easy. Get out there and do one once a week. And
created healthy competition. I love that. Wow. Okay.
And when we looked at the injury stats and incident stats after, they were actually inversely proportional to the participation. So high participating sites tended to have low incident scores. And I think there's a few things. Like there were probably a lot of supervisors there that really didn't care about safety as much as others. But just the fact that they were even doing it sends the right message to everybody, right?
Yes. I think that I couldn't help. I'm going to listen back on this, but I couldn't help but to pick up a pen and write notes when you were speaking, because I think that I hope you're still listening towards the end of this, because that is incredible advice. What makes a company great? What makes a company excellent? And some of these three things that you've commonly seen is measurables, because at companies they're measuring, because whatever is measured gets done, so that there's that system in place. And then, but first and foremost, you talked about people, that the leadership team, that there's this high sense of care for the individuals working in that company. And when that's from starting at the top, then it trickles down, and it's a good and healthy environment to work in. And then the last thing that you said is that there's accountability piece. Sure, we're now measuring things, but what do we do about them? And so that there's a sense of accountability in that company too. So I think that those are really great things to mention and great things to work towards, because our audience are people that want to get better. Our listeners are people that want to go to the next level, or at least help take their company to the next level too, as far as excellence. I mean, that's what we're all here to learn and grow. So, well, thank you so much, Dave. Do you have any final pieces of advice for safety professionals? Any final words?
I was just thinking, you said something earlier that I thought was actually worth reinforcing a bit. You talked about earlier in your career, you tried maybe to do too much too fast with some companies. And I think there's some brilliance in recognizing that. Because, too much too fast never works. So maybe a little bit of advice, if you get into a company that has, maybe a safety culture, if you will, a company culture that needs a bit of work, it doesn't hurt to move the ball up the field slowly. We should celebrate small successes. We don't need to win the, President's Award for Most Improved Safety from our client this year. As long as we're moving forward and we're better than we were last time, I would consider all of those little victories to be significant.
Oh my gosh, that's beautifully said, Dave. Thank you so much. I think that is a huge reminder, because as safety professionals, of course, like we're looking at the company that we're working with, or the client, in our world that we're working with, and there's always so much that needs to get done that it can be so overwhelming. And so really taking a step back and celebrating those small wins, and just knowing that there's progress, knowing that there's small progress, you're moving forward, is something to be proud of, and something to share with your team to be proud of. Share not just with yourself, but not just with the safety team, to share with the whole company. Like these are the small wins that we are achieving together. So that way you could build momentum, even if it's some of the smaller things. So I think that that's great advice. But thank you so much, Dave. I went over my time with you. I apologize. I knew that this would be a conversation that really flowed. So thank you for your time. And guys, if you want to follow Dave, we're going to include all of his contact information below in this link, so you can reach out to him. And Dave, and thank you so much for talking with me today. And thank you, I guess, and listeners, we'll talk to you again next time.
Great, and thank you so much for having me. And I wouldn't worry at all about going overtime. I enjoyed every minute of it. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks.